Welcome to the BXG Podcast, the podcast where pop culture and nerd culture meet.
You think it's just going to be barbecue sauce?
Because if you actually read those books, it's just gobbledygook.
I really think clothes should be mandatory.
Speaking of Star Wars,
Captain America.
trailer reaction video.
This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.
Sure is, Mandalorian fans. This is the way to episode 2, season 3 of the Mandalorian review. I apologize. I'm experiencing a little bit of throat discomfort today.
So she said.
I don't know that she did. In fact. Okay, chapter
18.
Yeah. Chapter 18. I'm like, well, no, like in my head, I'm like trying to do the math. I'm pretty sure this is chapter 18, but that doesn't make sense. I'm a little off kilter.
It's okay.
Today, yesterday, today, tomorrow, and Friday are probably the 4 most stressful days of my month. And after that, it's pretty much smooth sailing until this time of the month next month. So it's kind of my time of the month.
That's what she said. Enough.
So the Mandalorian chapter 18, The Mines of Mandalore. Din Djarin had a rough day. But now listen, I know people aren't too smart. This is going to be broken down into 2 segments, a spoiler-free segment, just our general thoughts, and then there's actually a timestamp in the description that says when spoilers begin. So if you want to skip to spoilers, go to that timestamp. If you would like to hear spoiler-free thoughts, continue to listen. Greg, chapter 18, The Mines of Mandalore, spoiler-free thoughts.
Spoiler-free. I mean, it was so sick when Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker just had that battle right, right in the middle. No. Okay, so
You're thinking of Return of the Jedi.
No, I really like this episode. It was almost weird that this show and The Last of Us come out like almost parallel. I mean, not exactly parallel, but almost parallel. Where Pedro Pascal is the main badass, and then the little person is there. We're not sure how they can defend themselves, and then we get another side of things. And I thought that was, for this episode, very, very cool. Plus, we got to see some new things. We got Amy Sedaris just being Amy Sedaris, and I love her in every single episode of this. She's the mechanic. And at the beginning, I love her. I just love it, Amy Sedaris. So I like all that. Was very good. I thought it was just, I feel like this season, at least through the first 2 episodes, is more of like a setup kind of thing than anything. But there was a ton of action, but this is all set up to him becoming, back to being an actual Mandalorian. And so for me, this episode was a great balance of the trip continues and we're setting things up, but we do get to see some new things from Grogu. And we get to see some creatures that aren't necessarily the creatures we're accustomed to. So I mean, it's so weird because we go from The Last of Us to this, and it's just 2 completely different shows. It's not like I'm going to say The Last of Us is like, oh my God, it's just 2 different things. It's, it's sci-fi compared to based off of a video game. Well, it's not sci-fi. It's like, it's more literary sci-fi. And then this is more of like straight sci-fi. This is more straight sci-fi, space and all that stuff. I mean, because The Last of Us is more of just, The Last of Us is more just Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
And then this is, pick your favorite, sci-fi, Philip K. Dick. You do, something like that. You could just be like, it's something very sci-fi, very not at all realistic to The Last of Us. Rare, but seems somewhat believable thing. So for me, I mean, I like the way this show looks. I also like that this, so far through 2 episodes, not a wasted minute, based on the episodes aren't that long, but also it feels like everything has something to do with something else, and that's refreshing to see from shows.
So this episode, as you mentioned, Amy Sedaris is Peli Motto, Pedro Pascal obviously is Din Djarin the Mandalorian, Katie Sackhoff, Bo-Katan Kryze, Jon Favreau wrote, directed by Rachel Morrison. I don't really think this is a story spoiler per se, but I saw a lot of reviews saying that how dark the episode was took away from kind of the impact of the episode. Did you have any issues with, being able to see the action, being able to just
like the lighting of this?
The lighting, yeah. I'll give you a headline from one of the reviews. The Return of Mandalore is ruined by terrible lighting.
No. And I mean, my TV is like 6 years old, and it picked this up just fine. I mean, I had no issues with that. I never once, I could see everything fine. That's weird. I did not have any issues with that. So that's very odd to me.
Yeah, I think,
I guess don't watch it on your laptop. I don't know. I like to tell people on that end, get a TV, you scumbags.
Well, this was a pretty big website's review. I'm not going to say which one, but just kind of glancing at the rest of it, skimming it, I kind of feel like the reviewer just completely missed the episode. Like, just missed the mark on the episode. They argued that the cinematographer, or the director, Rachel Morrison, who was cinematographer for Black Panther, tried to make this a horror vibe. And I guess you kind of say that they're going through places kind of dilapidated, but I don't know that that's really what they were going for. And I, having seen that kind of ahead of time, not really seeing any details, but seeing that particular complaint ahead of time, I also did not have any issues watching the show,
like, wow,
based on the lighting of the episode. I'm not as high on this episode as you are. I think that there are certain things that I outright didn't like. For one, the character of Pelo Motto, who Amy Sedaris, is that? Yeah. Not a fan. I find that character to be.
Oh, you don't like her? I like her a lot.
Exceptionally annoying. I find that character.
Well, I think that's the idea of it. I think that's the idea.
Yeah, but that's the thing, though, is that I don't know that it's. I disagree with you that the idea of the character is to be annoying, because anytime that there's been a character in a Star Wars property, regardless, that is annoying, it's a problem. I'm going to cite specifically Jar Jar Binks, obviously, but even Jake Lloyd's take on a very young Anakin Skywalker was annoying because of how over exuberant he was. But this isn't a Phantom Menace review, it's a Mandalorian review. So I don't particularly like that character. I find her to be grating. And then there are some other things that I actually kind of like noticed for the first time while I'm watching this particular episode, and I feel like there are maybe some cracks in the Beskar armor a little bit. And that's just kind of where I sit from the standpoint of this episode. But we can, I mean, as you are prepared, we can get into spoilers. There will be a spoiler notification. And there will also be a timestamp in the description for when that starts.
Let's do it.
So see how there was a loud klaxon there sound to denote spoilers are incoming. I was not a big fan of Grogu doing flips
That was wild.
throughout the episode. Like the first time I was like, oh, that looks very unnatural because this is an animatronic puppet. And then when it kept happening, I was kind of dumbfounded, honestly, and again, I would think, I'm going to move my computer here slightly. I would think that lessons of the past would have been learned a little bit with this, because I remember seeing Attack of the Clones. Attack of the Clones? Is that? Yeah, Attack of the Clones. And thinking, oh man, it's so cool watching Yoda flip around and do lightsaber stuff. And then like years later when I'm adult, I'm like, maybe not. And so to kind of see that, I don't know, I was like really taken aback by that. Like, oh, he can just do like somersaults now, So I was a bit flummoxed by that. I'm going to say where I think that there's maybe some cracks in the armor. As I'm watching this, I'm thinking to myself, Din Djarin is constantly talking to Grogu. Grogu is a toddler. I mean, we don't really know, age of that species, 50 years, 60 years, however,
right.
55 at this point. We know Yoda dies. He's older than 700 or whatever, but what's the lifespan? How do we correlate? And he's saying it's exposition for the audience, really. It's like, okay, we're going to have him talk to Grogu over here. But really what it is it's exposition for the audience. And I'm like thinking to myself, I'm like, could they have made a better show? This is going to be a hot take. This is going to be boiling. Surface of the sun take. Could they have made a better show dramatically without Baby Yoda, Grogu? And I say this because when they're on these missions together, he never stops talking. And it's basically he's functioning as the narrator.
Mm-hmm. And
I think that I'm starting to think a little bit deeper, what if, because we always say less is more a lot of times. And now I wonder, could that be the case with this? Where what if he was just striding into, we're in spoilers. Yeah. Striding into the mines of Mandalore. It's completely dilapidated. And the tension is so thick, you can cut it with a knife because it's silent instead of him constantly narrating what's going on to this kid who we all think's cute and we all love him. And, I forgot to bring him out. He's on my shelf over there somewhere, but I'm starting to think, how long does this go on? I think that they maybe could have made a compelling show by sidelining Grogu. With Luke for longer, maybe. And allowing the Mandalorian to complete this quest. Allowing the Mandalorian to complete this quest on his own.
I don't think you're wrong on saying, could this be a better show? Once you introduce a character like this that is loved by all,
many,
but especially children.
Kids, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're selling toys.
You have to think like that. You have to keep kids involved. And it's like you said, that scene without Grogu where it's the silence, that's awesome to adults. Kids are going to be like, what? Like, they're going to be constantly be like, where is, baby, where's Grogu? Like, that kind of thing. So you have to think on that end of the spectrum too, of like, this still is the selling toys. This is still the idea of those things. So like, I don't necessarily disagree. Like, is it a better show? I don't know. I mean, that's the other thing too. We don't really know. The show's still to be very good. I think there is that idea too. It's like when you go back and you look at Andor, which isn't a very adult show, nobody watched it.
I don't know that nobody watched it.
Well, what I mean, compared to other things, it was not a show that got good ratings, just based on other Star Wars things. And it was just one of those things, like, it was critically, people loved it. It was one of those things, but just didn't have the ratings that other things have had. And so Andor's awesome, but it is definitely geared towards people. I would say it's geared towards people that are our age. I don't think it's geared towards people that are, at Gen Z. I don't even think it's that. I think it's literally, it's millennials and older is what Andor is geared towards. It's almost like this is like one for them, Mandalorian, and the Andor series is one for us. That kind of idea of like the band puts out a total pop album meant to have hits, and they're like, all right, we're going to do this experimental album that like the real guys will know, the real fans will understand. And I think that's kind of where we're at now. I'm not saying it's any better or worse. I mean, I just think it's one of those things where once you've introduced somebody like Grogu, to step away from him will impact the show in different ways.
I'm just looking, just by comparison, at an article with some Nielsen ratings for Andor, and it is not the success that Star Wars excuse me is maybe known for, but it was still in the top 10 most streamed episode, like, during its run.
But I just mean, I remember us talking about it not having the
yeah, sure. A lot of people were not talking about it. Yeah, I guess my thing is, I think that this year in particular, we have watched, well, not this year, but because it's March, but in the last 12 months, we have watched a lot more content that has been specifically geared towards adults, going the whole way back to We Own the City, Under the Banner of Heaven, House of the Dragon, The Last of Us, Andor. And I think that maybe at this point, I'm just looking for something that is maybe a little bit more adult. And it's kind of, as a Star Wars fan, it's kind of hard to reconcile that, because at the end of the day, Star Wars is for kids. I mean, the original 3 movies are PG, right? So, and you have characters like R2-D2 and C-3PO and the Ewoks and the Wookiees and Jar Jar and, all these different characters that are definitely geared towards kids. But I think that maybe what happened was that Andor showed the possibilities of what an adult-oriented Star Wars could be. And I find that prospect to be very tantalizing, versus here's a puppet doing flips. And so I think that one thing that the first episode did was really reintroduce that kind of space meets spaghetti Western vibe that the original season was going for. And we talked about that in our review of that episode. I think reestablishing that was a good idea. And I think that the task in front of them at this point is going to be to kind of balance that with having these moments that are more geared towards kids. With all that being said, that kind of gets away from this individual episode as a whole. Din Djarin had a bad day. He gets attacked by these little gremlin goblin things. I would add, goblin, we know the goblins aren't are not real, but this is Star Wars, and it is therefore kind of a science fiction fantasy tale. There weren't really goblins. They kind of reminded me of the snow creature on Hoth and Empire, just miniaturized. And then he gets swallowed up by this crab droid thing. And then at the end, he gets in the water, gets attacked by this giant beast who, as she's reading the legend, Bo-Katan's reading the legend of why the skull of this beast was adopted as the sigil of Mandalore. Like, there it is in the water. Greater concerns aside with the show, I'm very interested to see where this goes next. And I was kind of under the impression after the first episode that this quest of I have to bathe in the living waters of the mines of Mandalore was going to be like half the season. And it's episode 2 and he's already bathed in the living waters of the mind of Mandalore. So I'm kind of at a loss. I think that they've historically with the Mandalorian and other Star Wars shows, they do a really good job of not showing too deep into the series or too deep into the season with the different trailers. But I mean, those aspects, spoiler, now we're into spoilers, but what did you think of kind of Din Djarin's no good, horrible, rotten, very bad day, and how some of the things fit in and maybe where we're going to be going from here?
I mean, I think it's just showing that thing that, as cool as he is, he's not invincible. And, that I think that's really important. This idea that he's a Mandalorian, but only at this point by his own idea and not truly the idea of Mandor. And I thought that was really important. I also thought it was important that he shows the part where he's, in his vessel and he's like, hey, that's where I grew up. I actually didn't live here. Right. And all those little things I think are super important. And the idea that he's still trying to find himself. It sounds funny. And I looked at this episode as almost like I'm looking at this season, but starting with maybe this episode more than anything is like a coming of age storyline, which I'm a sucker for a coming of age, but it's like that finding yourself kind of thing. And it's like he needs to reestablish himself.
Sorry, a little late on
coming
that.
Of age story of
That's what she said.
I need to figure out what I'm actually doing. He's lost. He is actually lost right now. And as whatever you say with him, with Grogu flipping around, there is that serious storyline of that where he doesn't have a place. Honestly, right now, Din Djarin doesn't have a place, and now he's trying to find that. And I think that's really important. So on that storyline, it was this idea that, he gets caught, he gets beat up, he's in a bad place. He sort of gets saved, but then it's like, oh, this is just going to continue. So I can almost look at this as him almost going through a Pac-Man-esque game or something where he has to keep beating levels to get to where he needs to actually go. And I mean in a positive way, not just streamline, but he's going to earn his way to becoming an actual Mandalorian.
I'm curious about a few things that were shown off or talked about in this episode. Number one is he visits Palo Motto to see if he can get a memory chip for the IG droid. She just doesn't have one, and the Jawas don't have one. So she gives him this bumbling R5 unit, and then he goes anyway. So I'm curious if they're going to circle back to the IG unit, number one. And two, if they're not, that was kind of a waste of about half an episode, of a short episode, no less. So I'm curious to see how they circle back to that. The other thing is that, kind of reading into this a little bit more deeply, would you say that the crab droid that was then thing pops out of it. It's got like its long staff situation going on. When it's has him in its claws, this droid thing disarms Mando, throws the gun on the ground, throws the Darksaber on the ground. At that point, does that mean that droid is the true wielder of the Darksaber because it defeated him in combat, which is how the Darksaber has to change hands, which would then mean that Bo-Katan is now the true wielder of the Darksaber, which is what she wanted all along, because she defeated that droid in combat. And so now the question becomes, because I thought they show him very deliberately clipping it back onto himself after that battle, after he comes to, after she saves him. I thought when they were headed down to the waters that she was going to attack him for the Darksaber.
Yeah, right.
I thought that's kind of where that was heading, but I'm interested to see if that's how that whole thing gets interpreted. And I'm interested to see, because like you said, he is trying to find himself. He's trying to earn back being, part of the creed of Mandalorian, but he did what was required. And so now there's 6 more episodes. So what does that mean? Where do we go from here? He does have to find his place, but I felt like this whole season was going to be about that. And this kind of turns my expectations on their head a little bit, because now I feel like there's not a whole bunch of unexplored tethers other than the Darksaber. We know Moff Gideon's floating around, and then uniting all the scattered remnants of Mandalore. And so, I mean, I think that the Darksaber and Moff Gideon kind of go together. And also his relationship with Bo-Katan and reuniting all of the disparate parts of this scattered civilization are also kind of go together. And I feel like Katie Sackhoff's character, Bo-Katan Kryze, is kind of the keystone piece of this season at this point.
Right. No, I mean, I feel like there could be a thing where he has it, but if he's not the true wielder of this, like, it starts to make you evil, right? I mean, that's like the idea of this, is like it starts to take away stuff from you, right? I feel like that's the background. I thought that was the background of the, if you're not the true wielder, it like does stuff to you. I thought that was the idea behind this. I could be wrong. But I definitely thought there was some kind of I thought there was like a negative impact to it if you have it, but you aren't actually the true wielder of it. But what I do think is, if he isn't, there is going to be some sort of, whether or not it does anything to you or not, there is some sort of impact behind that. And I think the idea that it stood out so much in this episode, I mean, it's obviously very highlighted whenever it's being used, but I think that is definitely important, of the idea that it can be, this may be where more of the season's going, of like, who is the true wielder of this? And what does that actually mean?
Well, whoever wields the Darksaber is the ruler of Mandalore.
Right. But I thought it is, if you don't actually earn it, I felt like there was a negative impact.
I'm looking, I'm on the Star Wars.
Something that was like very deep and not.
I'm on the Star Wars
fan theories.
I'm on the Star Wars Wikipedia, also known as Wookieepedia.
Nice.
I'm trying to see.
I definitely remember reading this, but like I mean, like I said, it could have been something where it was a fan theory about it, that if you're not the true wielder but you own it, it takes away, you're not as powerful, something like that. I could be wrong, but either way, I think whether that's right or wrong, I think there is the idea that this is the most important thing about it, is that whoever has it is really going to be the key in her battle with him. I mean, there was that thing too, whenever Grogu pulled in, parked down the ship, and she was like, let's end this guy. And then it wasn't it wasn't Din Djarin, that she was like, oh, okay, and now I gotta hunt him down. So it could be a tete-a-tete between the two of them for the rest of the season. Or, I mean, like you said, we thought it was going to be a season of this, and it turned into 2 episodes. I mean, there is something to be said about also just not knowing what a season will be about.
So, okay, this is what the armor says to Din Djarin. It is said, quote, "It is said one warrior will defeat 20 and the multitudes will fall before it. If, however, it is not won in combat and falls into the hands of the undeserving, it will be a curse unto the nation. Mandalore will be laid to waste and its people scattered to the 4 winds."
I knew it was something negative. I just couldn't remember exactly, but yeah.
I mean, that's kind of vague.
Right, but it is
But-
negative.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know.
They like curses.
Yeah,
in
they're
Star Wars.
kind of the Mandalorians themselves are a bit of a mysterious culture. I wonder, I would be curious to maybe
They like tarot
dig
cards.
into where, like, what the inspiration for is.
That would be interesting. The Mandalore.
Not that character himself, the character of Din Djarin the Mandalorian. Vikings, ancient Greece, Norse, and Celtic inspirations, which that
makes sense.
Yeah, a lot of that
Yeah.
makes sense. For sex of the Mandalorian, sex, SECTS, not
Yeah.
the other thing. Anyway. Yeah, I still, not to speak too negatively or about this, because I thought it was a fine episode. I think it was, it felt like maybe a 7 to me. And maybe that's part of the disappointment, is you're going back to Mandalore for the first time in this series, and it's such an important place of this culture and its history. And it was kind of I don't want to say it was a letdown, but it wasn't like, oh shit, here we go.
Right.
And expectations sometimes can steal away some of the joy found within, but
Sure.
I thought it was a fine episode. I'm just kind of like, I don't know. I'm viewing this through different colored lenses than I had before Andor. So there's that. But anyway, episode 3 of the season next week. Any thoughts, predictions, what have you?
Wow. Like you said, this kind of threw me off a little bit, where, thoughts and predictions. I mean, I obviously think that we're going to see more of Grogu's powers being to use, not necessarily flipping around, but he does. Yeah, he is definitely at least somewhat with the Force now, and has those powers. So I think we'll see more of that. I mean, I do think it is going to be a constant. I think we're going to see Din Djarin struggling a lot more than we have in the past with things. And I don't necessarily mean just physically. I think there could be a lot of like emotional, physical struggles that he has to go through the rest of the way.